Breaking news this morning, President Biden has announced more student loan handouts this morning, saying he'll cancel $7.7 billion in student debt for 160,000 borrowers. The administration has already approved almost $160 billion in student loan debt cancellation for more than 4 million people. In a statement released this morning, Biden writes, quote, "I will never stop working to cancel student debt no matter how many times Republican elected officials try to stop us." I assume he's referring to the Supreme Court. Joining me now is Virginia Congressman Bob Good. He's the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus and a member of the Education and Budget Committees. Congressman, should we assume that it's the Supreme Court that the president is saying he's not going to listen to?
Well, he's going to stop on January 19 of 2025 because he's not going to be president anymore. But this president thinks he has constitutional authority he does not have. Authority he said he didn't have, about a year and a half ago when he said he didn't have authority on his own to unilaterally do it. Nancy Pelosi said he didn't have authority to do it, and yet he continues to do it anyway. He's spending money that we don't have. He's further bankrupting the United States and further harming the economy. Not to mention the fact we had in our Education Committee a hearing with Secretary Cardona recently, and I asked him, if student loan debt is legitimate, is it legitimate debt? Is it debt that should be paid? And he wouldn't answer that question. I also asked him, should we continue to make student loans if we're not going to require borrowers to pay them back? And he wouldn't answer that question.
Well, what do you mean? Is it real? I mean, what is the question that you're asking in terms of, is this real debt that we're forgiving?
Well,
what were you getting at?
Biden and his administration seem to think that student loan debt is somehow illegitimate, that people who borrow it shouldn't have to pay it back, that somehow they were maybe forced into it and they shouldn't have to make payments. I asked him, should people who have mortgages make those payments? People who have car loans or credit card loans, should they make those payments? Why is it student loan debt this administration somehow thinks is illegitimate and the actual borrower shouldn't pay them back, and that debt should instead be transferred to the taxpayers who didn't borrow the debt?
Well, I don't understand the way this is happening at all. I mean, on July 10th, 2023, the Supreme Court ruled in Biden versus Nebraska, 6-3. The court struck down the administration's student loan forgiveness program and agreed with those pushing against it. Under the court's ruling, again, last year, July 2023, under the court's ruling, the U.S. Department of Education was prohibited from implementing the Biden-Harris administration's debt relief program. Why does this president continue to forgive student loan debt despite the fact that the Supreme Court has ruled this unconstitutional?
And even before the Supreme Court did it, we passed it. My Congressional Review Act passed both houses of Congress, the House and the Senate, on a bipartisan basis, overturning his previous student loan transfer scheme. And yet he vetoed it. And thankfully, the Supreme Court stepped in, as you noted. But this is a lawless president who's trying to buy votes and, again, thinks that the American taxpayers should provide free college. So he's trying to buy votes for the upcoming election, just like he did last year. It's going to fail, but he's going to continue to try. He's going to relentlessly try until he's no longer president.
It's quite extraordinary to me that he continues doing this despite the Supreme Court ruling. What is the Supreme Court here for if we're not listening? We're just blowing off what they say.
Well, this is a lawless administration. They don't enforce the border laws. They're weaponizing their Department of Injustice and federal law enforcement against their political opponents. So it's no surprise that they don't think they're bound by the Supreme Court or the Constitution in terms of who's able to spend money. They don't want to work through Congress. Frankly, they can't work through Congress. That's why the Congressional Review Act overturned his previous student loan transfer scheme that was nearly $1 trillion.
This is all quite extraordinary to me, Karine. Your reaction?
Well, I think that the president is desperate to get any votes that he can, especially from young people. But funny enough, young people aren't having any of it. I've been reporting with progressive groups like the Sunrise Movement, and they're fixated on oil drilling. They think Biden is drilling too much. Meanwhile, his core voters think that he's not drilling enough. So really, there's nothing that the president can do to win right now. And this is a political play at votes.
Yeah, it's interesting that young people are not paying enough attention to this, and he's still canceling debt. Because young people, like the rest of us, are all focused on the cost of everything and the inability to take out a mortgage because of 7% plus. Let me get your take on that, Congressman. The Federal Reserve Board issued its 2023 economic report on the well-being of U.S. households. It finds 65% of adults say that price increases have made their financial situation worse. 19% of renters reporting being behind on their rent. House Republicans posted this on X, saying since Biden took office, a McDonald's medium fries is up nearly 168%. A McDonald's hamburger Happy Meal up better than 140%. A 5-layer burrito from Taco Bell is up nearly 153%. President Trump is aware of all of this, and he's slamming Biden on inflation. He did so yesterday again. Watch.
The news on inflation, it really is rampant. It's moving at a level like people have not seen. They don't seem to be able to cut it down. Biden has no control over what's happening. He started it with energy, and now it's taken on a life of its own. On another note, Biden is releasing 1 million barrels of oil from the Northeast Reserve in a bid to lower prices at the pump just before the election, because he's unable to drill properly, and he's destroyed everything.
Yeah, Trump is also slamming Biden's plan to release oil from he wants to release 1 million barrels of oil to lower gasoline prices for this tri-state area, he claims, ahead of the summer driving season, Congressman. Is this ahead of the summer driving season or ahead of the election?
It's ahead of the election. He thinks it's a strategic political reserve, and young people are suffering. Americans are suffering under this president's policies, whether it's the grocery prices, as you've noted, housing prices, utility prices, gasoline prices. They're really suffering, and that's what this is really about. Heck, that's why they're persecuting President Trump through the legal means. They know they can't beat him because everybody was better off when he was president, including young people. And the student loan debt issue that you were talking about, ranks about 15th among young people on their most concerning issues in the country right now.
So what's the most concerning issues? Inflation?
Inflation absolutely is the number one thing. They just can't afford to get by, and it's hurting young people, seniors on fixed income, regular income Americans. Gasoline, housing, groceries, utility prices are crushing them, not to mention interest rates because of Biden's massive spending caused inflation. Well,
not to mention a dangerous world. Foreign policy hasn't been much better. We're watching 2 wars underway right now, and China on the march. I know you recently joined a delegation of lawmakers traveling to Turks and Caicos to meet with the American tourists detained there on ammunition charges. Those Americans could face up to 12 years in prison. One of the people being detained is a constituent of yours who has already served 2 weeks in jail as well as in federal prison. Tell us about the trip. What do you make of the State Department's response here?
State Department has not been actually very helpful. That's why we went down as a congressional delegation to meet with the governing authorities there in Turks and Caicos to tell the stories of our constituents like Tyler Wenrich, my constituent, and the unintended consequence of their law. Their law, they've outlawed ammunition and firearms in their country with a 12-year minimum sentence, as you noted. But you've got American tourists who've come on a family vacation or a wedding vacation or just celebrating some other special occasion in their lives, and they're being held for weeks or even months on end and threatened with 12 years in prison for accidentally having 1 or 2 stray bullets in their luggage that were not found until they were leaving the country because they were in the lining or the seams of their bags. They would have never found those stray bullets if they hadn't been found when they were leaving the country through the scanners.
Well, how did they have stray bullets in the luggage?
Well, in my constituent's case, there was 1 or 2 bullets, actually, that had slipped down between the seam and the lining of his bag. He would have never, of course, taken them through security and TSA, which they were not found, or entered that country with those intentionally. Yeah. But he would have never have found them. They had to take him through the scanners 2 or 3 times to see what was setting him off. Right. And again, like you said, he's been held for a month. He served 2 weeks in jail and prison there, and we're asking him to be released immediately.